Welcome to the next podcast of Great Rising. It's so nice to have Nancy Giordano here with me. She is a strategic futurist talking about AI, the world, how it's evolved as fast as it is, and where we're going into the future. I recently read your book, Leadering, Amazon bestseller. It's awesome. Great job on that. So I was hoping you could just introduce yourself, then we'll kind of get into the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so very much for inviting me to have this conversation. And I was making the drive down to your office earlier, and I started thinking more about like where we are. And I think that actually maybe I'm evolving into just exponential strategist, and we'll take out futurist because like we're here. Like all the things that we've been talking about and predicting and imagining are now hitting at this very moment, I think. And I think now it's what do we do with it?
It's such a cool concept, what you do, because so many people go to their desk and they do tasks every day. They respond to emails, and they spend so little time on strategizing for future. And then when you listen to your book on leadering and talk about like what companies are doing from a strategic standpoint, as you've kind of gone through the different organizations, let's start with that. Is like, I feel like so many companies just spend time doing the tactical that they don't step away from their business and think about how their business could be better from a strategy or a mind standpoint.
Yeah, the way I evolved into this work is that I was working with really, really great strategy people, right? I was working at Chiat Day Advertising. I was working with really great clients. And even then, they would stay in these lanes. Like someone would come and tell us what the like sales trends were going to be in January and what the demographic trends were going to be in April and some lifestyle trend thing in September. And no one hooked all that together. So I think one of the biggest things that we don't do as strategists is look more systemically, like really look at all of the information and understand how these things are all connected to one another. We were just talking about chronic pain and the rise in chronic pain, which is also, I think, related to the fact that people have so much fear around the future. Like these things are not disconnected from one another. So I think that I was fortunate that I have a gift in being able to do that, right? Really look across a broad range of things and be able to hook things together. I try not to pay attention to other things that I should be paying attention to, but that stuff I'm really good at. And I got frustrated that people weren't doing that. So that was back in the day. And so I was really more about like, A, how do we hook information together? And then how do we look further out? We were all looking just at the moment and not how things were shifting and changing. So it was really more of an orientation to that. Where I think we are now is that people are just so trying to make sense of right now. And the demands are really intense, and they're getting more and more intense. So I have a whole slide that I use in my keynote talks where I talk about the 9 things that a business leader is currently trying to navigate in real time. So the luxury then of being able to look out and being able to take all this information and figure out how it all fits together and frame it in some way that makes sense is really, it's daunting, it's hard, but that is the work, right?
Yeah, and as you say those things, I think about a typical business. Most businesses, I believe, look backwards.
Yeah.
I mean, even in your book, you referenced the stat that less than 6% of board seats in publicly held companies are held by individuals, male or female, under 50.
I know. Isn't that crazy?
Even with the new mandates of finding those to sit on the board, females, like in California and that sort of thing. And so we have this fast evolving, moving world, and yet the playbook is I'm going to go hire somebody that's done it before. I'm going to hire somebody that's looking back and going to give me on their mistakes versus let's put somebody on our board that's going to challenge us to just think totally differently.
100%. I think a lot about reframing risk. I talk a lot about that. How do we rethink risk? And one of the things we do is we built all these things in the industrial era that we think are going to keep us safe as we head into this much more exponential one. And those are the things I think are all creating vulnerability now. So certainly like relying on tenure to be, the thing that's going to guide us wisely is certainly one of the biggest ones where people think that that's a safety measure. And I think it's actually a really, really dangerous way of doing it. So.
Seems like a huge risk to me. Like if you have a bunch of board members for a major company that have no idea what's happening in the world of AI and ChatGPT and all the things that are happening, how could they possibly provide value even in that situation?
Yeah, I used to think that there was none. Like I used to be like, we should just get rid of this whole like board structure and I was going to ready to blow it up. And then you realize, okay, it really is about marrying, right? Weaving this wisdom. I think there is some perspective again that hopefully someone who's been through a recession or two has been through, different kinds of waves of things that actually can provide grounding in moments where people get really scared about things is really useful. But I think that relying on them to have the whole picture and understand if they have no lived experience of what's currently happening right now and don't have, don't use these technologies. There's a senator, I don't know what party he's from, but recently he's been in the news because he's taking an AI class because he's like, I'm going to be legislating on this stuff and I don't know anything about it. Like I really do need to learn. So that not most board members don't go do that. The other thing I will say, I've actually done a lot of talks with board directors. There is so much coming at them so much faster because the decision cycle also used to be longer, right? Once in every month, every quarter, you have a board meeting and you make the really big decisions. Now they're happening like in real time. So the question is, can you even tap the board that quickly, or how much can we expect the board to keep up with all the things that are happening? We're learning organizations. We're learning every day about what's working and what's not working. And so I think the structure needs to be rethought about how we have advisors in our work. I do think external perspective, hugely important, particularly around ethics. And thinking about how our work impacts a broader stakeholder group. So maybe there's just another way we have to structure that.
Yeah, and expanding upon that idea of those older board members and how dramatic it is. Even the thought of, you read story after story of that, as you refer to it, old rule of those that go into protection. They say, we had something. I mean, probably I'll go like, the most extreme worst example I can think about that applies to modern day is the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma, how they uniquely got everybody hooked on their OxyContin. Then 17 years, they slightly changed the formula, so they let it go all the way out, and then all of a sudden they release their new formula, and that buys them another 17 years of patent. And then right at the end, they finally admit and say, oh, we're going to now profit off of getting you off of this addiction. It's like, it's the Empire of Pain. The book is just mind blowing that can happen in America. But you think about, that's an extreme example, but that old rule and how much of that happens, when we think about whether it's big pharma or big finance or really any of these, they tend to go into, we've made a lot of money doing the same thing, so let's continue to write that playbook.
Yeah, I think partly is we've been doing the same thing, and partly is we only look at our little piece of the puzzle, and we don't look at our responsibility across the whole. So I talk a lot. People always ask me about doing good versus doing financially well. Like, how they put them on either ends of a spectrum, and I think it's the wrong model. I think of it as more of a nested system, right? We're professionals who do our work. We're humans that bring our thinking to that, and our values and our emotions and our experiences, and all that should be actually embedded and part of the work. And we're members of society. And that system has always existed, but we've only looked at this part. And so now the boundaries between those things are becoming much more permeable. We're being asked and be held accountable for that now. So part of the reason that's all coming out, and even McKinsey's role, right, and being able to turbocharge those sales for opioid addiction is because now we're looking at it much more broadly and saying we have a responsibility to one another. And the reason, again, that's so important for this conversation is as we head into an exponential future, if we bring that mindset where I'm only going to protect my own, it is so dangerous when we have this exponential power now to be able to do things so much more quickly and so much more broadly.
Yeah, when you look at like pure capitalism, pure communism, pure socialism, when you get into those very defined things, it's all bad, right? The worst parts about capitalism is when somebody's purely thinking about how to make money. And then all of a sudden now that the scariest thing about pure capitalism is that how it drives a generation, possibly an entire generation, towards communism, in which we grew up thinking about how bad it was, right? Like, we grew up Cold War. And so in today, with as fast as media travels and as impressionable as things can be, like, how do we do that safely? How do we progress in the right way, but not just at 1,000 miles an hour down the freeway and then all of a sudden realize, oh, we missed the turn back there?
So the first thing is, I think, this whole idea about pure capitalism, I think, is an interesting question, right? Because the question is right now, is it a fair playing field? And I would argue it's pretty stacked. It's not a very fair playing field. I think if it's all completely fair, then in some ways, game on. But right now, it's not, right? There's a lot of biases and a lot of structural things in there that don't make it fair for people. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is, I think that, we've talked about stakeholder capitalism. Can we look more broadly at the various components of it? And the stakeholders are not just, again, investors or capital holders, right? They're employees and they're partners. It's the environment. It's the community in which we work in. But I will also, the future is as a stakeholder, right? So are we looking at it and measuring it the right way? Right now, what do we measure? We measure GDP. We measure stock performance. We measure whatever's on a financial sheet that you know better than I do. And we don't have enough measures, I think, that go more broadly around that. ESG is not proving to be the savior that I think is going to make it easier for people. It makes it sometimes more complicated for people. So I think that's part of it. But there's a philosophy that I've become introduced to by Riane Eisler. She wrote a book called The Real Wealth of Nations. That kind of takes Adam Smith's book and turns it on its head and talks about the pieces of the economy that are missing and that are not accounted for in some way. But she also offers an alternative to this tug of war between capitalism and socialism or communism. And she'll say both of those are systems that are based on domination. The question is, who's going to dominate whom, right? Is it the proletariat? Is it the elite? And we go back and forth between those. What if we had partnerism? And she's been doing a lot of work in excavating from history when there were societies in which we did not compete with one another for a relentless winner-take-all game, that there was shared power with versus power over. And that's sort of where stakeholder capitalism is trying to go. But what we imagine a different way in which we looked at things, again, more broadly, we took responsibility for things more broadly, and we were willing to share power as opposed to control it all.
Yeah, that makes me think just what we went through the last 3 years. So we go through pandemic, nobody was prepared for it. And you have a couple companies that have largest profits of all time.
Tech companies.
And now all of a sudden you go from we hate capitalists to, okay, we're going to reward these capitalists in a very insane way. And it was crazy to me to watch the dynamic of who was all about supporting pharma versus who was probably prior, like how quickly that dynamic shifted. And then you were literally shamed if you didn't do it, right? You were a terrible person if you didn't go get shot up 3 times, and
right.
And it was like this just social experiment, not in a conspiracy way, but it was a social experiment to me to watch just how different it was, and now what happens the next time that happens? Who do we trust? How do we trust?
Right.
What are the long-term effects?
Yeah.
I mean, we could probably go into it, but just kind of your thoughts on that.
Well, I think fear. Fear is a really corrosive thing, which is why I've been spending the last couple of years just trying to reduce fear. Like leadering is really an invitation to not be so afraid of the future, but to actually embrace it with some sense of confidence and some sense of opportunity and some sense of agency in it. When we have that, then we don't get so scared, and when we have that, then we make better decisions. And you see in the electorate, often people vote against their best interest because they've been told to fear something else, and they aren't really thinking through it. And when many of the industries, I would say, are incentivized to conjure up that fear. I talk a lot about that to youth. I talk to college students a lot. I say, just so you know, everyone around you is incentivized to make you as scared as possible, whether that is the media, whether that's social media, whether that's an incumbent who doesn't want you to try something new, right? Everyone's in there telling you it's a really scary and bad thing. So the question will become, how do we develop some sort of a better radar for that? My kids will tell me that they can smell bullshit faster than I can, and so that they aren't as vulnerable or as duped as somebody who's older might be. So I do think there's something about that. They're taking in so much so fast, and they watch all sort of the behind-the-scenes stuff. A friend of mine once used to have a special effects company, or a company for the movie industry that did all the behind-the-scenes stuff, and he used to have a sign in his office that says, "We take the magic out of movies." But in some ways, they're learning, right, the magic behind the social media algorithm, or the sort of the trickstery thing about whatever they think is happening. Unfortunately, it's gone the other way, right? Now they're cynical of everything, and they don't accept anyone's point of view. They don't even know if they should vote, because it doesn't really matter. The political system is not going to have their back. So I think the social contract around all that stuff is broken, and they're looking for someone that they can trust, whether it's a brand, a CEO, a peer group, a party, something that will inspire them, that thinks it's got their back. And I talk a lot about the importance of people feeling well held. When people feel well held, they work collaboratively inside an organization, inside a society, inside a community, right? And when they feel like they're not well held and someone's just trying to take it, then they're like, I'm going to take it too. And so I think there's a lot of work that needs to get done in like calming people down, making them truly believe that someone's got their back by putting policies in place that will show it, again, inside our governments, inside our organizations, inside our communities, and then I think it will get better.
Yeah, you see it across so many different industries.
Yeah.
Perfect example, you open up your phone and Apple News says, torrential downpour threatens many lives in California. Right. We haven't had water in like 6 years. We beg for rain at any time of the year. And instead of the headline saying, California getting much needed rain, snowpack, best snow season ever, right? All these things that are great. What we open up when we read is somebody's going to die as a result of this rain.
Yeah, and I think, again, there's some balance, right? It could say, best thing we have is rain, stay away from trees, right? Because the people who died were the people who were under trees that weren't well rooted, because the rain did come in and suddenly like washed away the root system, and all of a sudden eucalyptus trees down, and some people did die. So there's a certain amount of precaution that you take when there's something, the condition has changed dramatically, but to balance it out, right? Not to make everything such a fear-mongery thing is exactly it. Because, my phone, I get news alerts for breaking news. And I laughed the other day, like, it's going to be like some Trump thing, it's going to be some Putin thing, and it's going to be sugar's bad for you. I'm like, hey, we know.
Yeah.
Right? These are not breaking news stories. So why would I, and I'm not saying that from a political party statement, I'm just saying that's like the news wants to like incite us all the way around headlines, around things that we are, already know.
That concept of sensationalism, right?
Sensationalism, yeah.
Everything
Now,
is sensationalized.
well, now you get it, you mix it with generative AI. My daughter showed me yesterday, my 19-year-old daughter, about like literally a film that was created, a generative film that showed Trump being arrested and showed Trump in a jumpsuit in jail. It looks real. You see Jared's face, like, shocked, or not Jared, his son, Trump Jr.'s face, like appalled that his father's being arrested. None of it is real, right? And yet immediately, people are going to get very, upset about that, or excited about that, or somehow emotionally enrolled in that. And so this is where we're really vulnerable right now, right? We already are like sort of an emotional tinderbox, and then you put that kind of technology on top of it, which is why I say, again, you cannot bring industrial era thinking into an exponential moment that we're in right now. We're not caught up. We're not, our reptilian brains aren't quite ready for what's going to hit us. So we have to figure out another way of doing it.
Yeah, that fear. When you think of fear, and then, okay, so where do we go? We go with AI, even movies, is generally our only basis of this, right? So we think Terminator, we think artificial intelligence, we think all the things that were sensationalized is building on this concept of AI. And then what I think is unique is this concept of singularity that you talk about, and that singularity of being where we're at kind of our max, or we're exponentially going together, computer and minds. That is, you ask 100 people, 98 of them are going to say, oh my God, that's bad.
Right.
So how do we navigate this next phase of, I think you said by like 2045, it could be like 100% singularity.
Yeah, that's right.
First, maybe touch on it. And then the second part of it is like, how do we best navigate that as our own souls?
Yeah, I mean, so Ray Kurzweil, he is the guru of these kinds of predictions. I think he's like the chief engineer of futurist for Google, and has written many, many books about this. And many of his predictions have come true, which is why people use him as more of a futurist oracle around that. And I think he's the one who said it was at 2045. It'd be interesting to see what he says now, that things have happened so quickly in the last few months, if he would have make that even faster. But yeah, that there would be this merging, right, of human and machine, and we'll become somehow and woven together and be able to accomplish tremendous things as a result of that. So I think the question is, in this moment in time, as we are navigating it, what story do we tell ourselves? I think a lot about the narrative that we hold is the one that frames our future. I've actually done a lot of work with science fiction writers and had them be part of my events and things, because I'm like, you guys have set the narrative for like what we should be thinking about for the future. Like, is this good or bad? There are some more protopian futurists. Ursula Le Guin used to write more humanistic future stories, but her voice gets drowned out by all the ones that are scary. And there's another woman, I forgot her name, but she does a lot of work right now in protopian futures. And if you look at actually the research, dystopian science fiction only makes us scared. It doesn't make us make better decisions. It's done under the tail of cautionary, like I just want you to make smart decisions, but really just scares us, versus protopian futures actually excite us. If you think about Star Trek, I always think about Wakanda, right? If you like, God, that's what AI could do. Like, that'd be amazing, just to be able to be healed with a wand, or be able to go do these kinds of things. So I do think we need more storytellers that can tell more balanced stories around it. There are things we should be scared of, but there's very little that we get told about all the really great things. So we see them in headlines, right? We see that we can now do protein folding in a way that with computers to be able to model the structure of a protein from just an amino acid strain, which was impossible to do 4 years ago. And now, like, all the world's proteins, plus some we didn't even know, are being decoded, which then allows us to think about drug therapy and diagnosis and disease so differently. Like, these are giant breakthroughs that are exciting. And so I spend a lot more time talking about those kinds of things, talking about what the upsides of them are, and balancing it out with the fact that we have to, again, approach it by putting humans at the center, by putting humanity at the center, by having responsibility to society. Like, if we do it with that, then I'm not so scared of what those technologies will do. I think the reason people get so scared is we are basing it on a very extractive mindset right now, which is a very polarizing one. And it's not just within a country. We also are competing with other countries around the world that may be thinking about these things differently. And we're going to be so afraid of losing because somebody else is going to do it faster, right? So
it's so fascinating. So kind of the concept of this podcast has always been like grit and what causes somebody to come up from wherever they've come, whether they're an immigrant or they're in inner city, and they've accomplished such great things. And to me, on the surface level, it looks like we are going so fast that it's going to create a larger divide.
Yeah.
Because if my son is in college and he's around other people talking to him about ChatGPT and he runs into Emma and they're talking about their two parents doing this thing on AI and they start geeking out on AI, that's a different conversation than somebody that's down the street talking about, hey, should we go play basketball and maybe talk about whatever is not basic that day, but what they know. And so you have an entire legislative body, probably across the world, that knows very little about how fast the world is moving. And yet they're tasked with governing how fast the world is moving. You and I can talk all day about how we create a inequality or a place where everybody has that same opportunity. I'd love to talk about opportunity. And so how do we create that opportunity for that? Because it creates the same opportunity for us to change the game, right?
Right, yeah.
It could go this way, which is, the youth and those that have opportunity to be in college and learn about ChatGPT, which anybody can, or it could go the other way, which is how do we empower these underprivileged kids and parents and how to come up as a result of it?
There's part of me wants to take 5 different portions of the story. So let me just back up for a second and weave the last question to this question. There's a tool that I created, super, super simple, that you hopefully read about in the book, but the riff map. Do you remember the riff map? Right? Which is about, again, how we tell ourselves the stories of the future. And when I think about, so the riff is that you basically look like a SWOT analysis, but instead of SWOT and looking external, you're really thinking about the future and what's taking place and your observations of it. So what have I observed that I'm really relieved by? What am I inspired by? What am I frustrated by? And what am I frightened by? And it helps us build, again, a more balanced narrative because often we populate the bottom really quickly. What are we frustrated by? What are we fearful of? And we forget about the things that are extraordinary at the top. So in this conversation about how do we ensure that everyone has a chance to participate, I am inspired by the fact that if you have access to any kind of connected device, you have access to the entire world's information. You can learn anything that you want to learn. The question is whether or not you have access to a connected device or not, whether it's a phone or a tablet or a computer or something like that. And the world is not fully connected there. But I think the UN, there's a stat I've been sharing lately, I think that they think that we'll be at 80 or 90% of the world's population will be connected to the internet in the next 20 years, which is up from 60 or 65% right now.
Yeah.
So if you imagine that 60, 65% of the world is connected to the internet, that means we can learn anything. Then the question is, what is the cultural imperative to do that? What is the social incentive to do that? What are the other ways to get people engaged? But you see extraordinary stories of people who do that. And that's why grit, I think, is such an important term. And that's why, for me, agency is such an important word. Take responsibility. Right? It's not going to get handed to you. I even talk to college students and say the syllabus is not going to prepare you well enough. You have to think about what else you need to do to supplement it. This is insane that a futurist mom has to beg her children to take an AI course, but I'm begging my children to take a basic course on AI. And now I'm actually going to work with a partner in Austin. We had a meeting yesterday. We're going to develop a course for college students. So sort of why should I care about AI or what AI means to me? Because they have to have some basic understanding of this. So I think the good news is there's more out there. I think that because it's happening fast, anybody can jump in. The moats around things are becoming much, much shallower, right? Don't you think that anybody can start a business now? I mean, the hassle, what's the hashtag? Hustle GPT, I think it is, which is about people going onto ChatGPT going, give me a business. I've got $1,000. I've got $100. Tell me a business I can start that would make me X amount of money in X amount of days. And everyone's comparing now their business strategies that ChatGPT has created for them. So I think it's exciting times. And I think more and more opportunity is available.
I think that maybe 10% of my entire office knew what ChatGPT was before 3 weeks ago. And I did a lunch and learn and taught everybody what it is. I couldn't even find somebody to teach the class. It's me geeking out at night, and I'm asking all kinds of questions and getting deeper and deeper. And from a competitive advantage, from a business standpoint, our efficiency is going to go through the roof.
Yeah.
And if you think about wages. I think it was who's the guy in Seattle that had the
gravity payments.
Gravity payments.
Dan
And he goes,
Graham,
I'm going to go to 70,000 as a minimum
Yeah.
wage. The old rule is going to go, you're crazy. And it's fair to think that. And I thought that initially. And then when you think, if I can somehow get my employees to think strategic, and whether it's the dinner line or the lunch line at Google, and creating those artificial moments you talk
Right.
about, 4 minutes together, which creates these things, and it's a huge, it's going to be a game changer. Your thoughts on, I think it's the biggest thing since we got the internet, but your thoughts on ChatGPT and its relevance over the next 36 months.
Yeah, I don't think it's just ChatGPT. I think it's AI period. Which is why I joined an AI company 8 or 9 years ago, because I was like, this is where it's headed. And I was really frustrated trying to move big, iconic organizations into the future. This was done before really around even the tech side. It was just getting food companies to care more about people, or beverage companies to care more about people. And it's like, kept telling me why these things wouldn't all work. And I just got super duper frustrated with most of them. Nestle was awesome. The rest were struggling more to understand how consumers were changing and making different decisions. I'm like, you know what? Why am I trying so hard to save the old guys? I'm going to go to the people who are building the future. And I joined an AI company back in the day, and it was really exciting to learn what the potential of all this was. And I do really look at more of the potential than the fear. I get super excited about what's possible. And so I do think that and we all said that like 2023, 2024 was going to be this inflection point, and here we are. Right, where no one knew exactly when that big step change was going to happen, but generative AI has become the thing that people can now test and feel and understand what is possible. It certainly threatens a lot of people who are in any kind of creative industry or who bundle and synthesize information for a living. You think about a travel agent, right? Or you think about anybody else and I'm not trying to call out travel agents. I think there's still a reason you might want to hire a travel advisor to get you out of a precarious part of the world right now. So I think that maybe we do want partners, but the role will shift. It's not about bundling information. It's selling me a different kind of service now. And I think that's what we need to think about, is where do we really add value? It's not just in collecting and bundling and spitting out information, because that is going to be done with a computer. Just like robotics are going to change manufacturing, right? We've got a lot of technologies that are going to change the way we have done things, and we need to be looking at how we do it differently. Maybe even manufacturing goes away because we'll be additive printing.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I did a conference 6 years ago, after I left the AI company because they didn't get the funding that we wanted. It fell apart, sadly. But then I was invited to build a conference on the 7 most disruptive technologies with a close friend of mine. And so we did AI, and we did robotics, and AR, VR, and additive printing, and cybersecurity, machine-human interface, and nanotechnology. And across all of those, I had an industry expert who could explain it, an industry practitioner who could tell you how they're currently using it, and then a visionary who could say where it's going in 5 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. So basically in a day and a half, 2 days, you got what it is, why it matters, and where it's going times 7. You see the world. Like, you know where it's going when you've gotten through that, right?
Yeah.
It was stunning to see what is possible across all of these. And it's not, again, just one technology, it's the convergence of these technologies and what they make possible. So I do have a vision about how the world will look very, very different in a very short period of time. And I think it's cool. So for me, the big question is, how do you distribute that productivity? Productivity will go up across all these things, right? You have machines that work 24/7. You have dark grocery stores. You have all kinds of things that can be working basically 24/7 in some form, online or offline, in our benefit. How do we distribute that productivity? So I think it becomes more of an economic conversation than a technology conversation.
But then all in that, at least in the United States and specifically in California, you have the old rule that run between lobbyists and unions. You have those two industries that are so powerful, and you have politicians, for right or wrong, they can't know everything. Mm-hmm. That just because they were a teacher of a subject doesn't mean they know about all subjects.
Yeah.
And so
nobody knows everything at this point.
So you have all these lobbyists that are going to be fighting to keep everything exactly the same in protecting, and that's who's feeding these politicians the money. And the biggest in California are the unions. And even right here in the port, I watched the 2 people running for mayor in Long Beach go into a union meeting, and they say, what do you think about technology? Automation. And they said, we refuse to support any initiatives that will take away a job.
Right. Because again, I would argue we don't have any kind of social safety nets. If you look around the world, there are other countries that are less resistant to automation or to various technology advances because they've got a different social safety net. People aren't connected to, so everything isn't connected to their job. Right now, you've got insurance, as you know, connected to your job. I'm an independent. I don't have a big corporation behind me. I have to figure out how to get insurance on the open market in some way that makes sense, right? And I think of some scrappy way to do it. I try and stay healthy. But the fact is that we don't have, I think, systems that hold people well. And I'm not trying to get, again, super socialist around that. I'm just trying to say we have to figure out how to distribute productivity differently. A, because I think it's just more fair. You saw this, you said the companies that did really well during the pandemic were the tech companies, right? Their revenues go up. So you think about he or she who holds the algorithm in the future is going to be a very, very powerful person or company. And right now it is primarily men who run these companies and for whom the value will be created. It's very disproportionate, unfortunately. Is that really, does that make sense? So that's the first thing. And then the second is a third of the population potentially, this is one estimate out of a program out of Harvard, and it was hard to get them to pin down exactly how they got to that number. So maybe it's high, but a percentage of the population will not be able to be reskilled in time to be able to take the jobs that are these tech jobs. What do we do then? Right? You've got a whole bunch of people in society that aren't able to work because the jobs that are available are not the ones that fit their skills. We have to figure that out better, right? When the industrial era hit, we built all kinds of social scaffolding. We put in the need for education, right? This idea that you'd have elementary school and high school that would educate the workers of the future. We put, EPA kinds of initiatives in place of and put all this smokestack, dirt into the air. We thought about what the implications of these technologies were going to be on society, and we built structures to hold that. We haven't done any of that for this exponential moment that we're in, have we?
Yeah, I mean, you have the coal miners, right, that want to protect coal jobs.
Right.
Because they're not trained to do anything else.
And we try and pick a few of them and say, let's make them make solar panels, right? But then we take out the community aspect of the fact that does that make sense for the community that they're in? Do they have the education, the desire, the want? Is that what their dad did, right? They want to do what their dad did. So there's a whole social piece that goes to this too.
And they even know they're dying every day they go to work.
I know.
And there's studies are showing, but a Trump will go in and say they want to get rid of the coal industry and
I know.
And breed on that fear and
Totally.
scare them into thinking, really, you're not smart enough to do anything else. I'm going to protect your job.
Right.
Instead of empowering them to go. So
yeah. Or just thinking about it, because there's another conversation around this, which is that if we can build houses for a fraction of the cost of what they currently cost now, if you 3D print a house, there's actually an initiative that my friends in Austin, Icon Build, just launched, which is a $99,000 challenge to build houses for $99,000 or less. Because all the technologies are making that more and more possible to be able to go do. They've been able to 3D print a house, I think, in the tens of thousands, not even in the 100,000. So if you have housing that comes down, you've got energy prices that go down. You think about vertical farming and the fact that we could grow food at a fraction of the cost of what it is now to be able to do that. There are ways of being able to meet people's needs without needing to have this giant income, right? What if we think again about how do we build solutions for people with these technologies that make it so that everyone can have a high quality of life without having to kind of be in the rat race of what has been in the decades past.
But you speak about this stuff in a very you have a goodness for the world, and you look at and probably give the benefit of the doubt a lot, and you have a current government that's most people don't have trust in them for the same reason we talked about the unions, the lobbyists, where they are. Well, you've never met a broke politician, right? Right. So how are we going to navigate this in a way that's going to be what you and I envision versus old rules still running it?
I look for the stories that give me hope on the horizon. So there are a lot of horizon initiatives. There's even a beyond capitalism kind of conversation, which might scare some folks. But I do think there's a way of thinking about how these things get distributed in more interesting ways. And I spend time that even in the internet itself, right? We have all these conversations about what the internet looks like now and what our data and how it's being held and who uses it and surveillance capitalism and all that kind of stuff. What if we were able to build a truly peer-to-peer internet in which we all held our own data, the actual technology that it takes to run an app is so compressed and so cryptographically designed elegantly that it can be on my own device and doesn't have to go through any kind of centralized server. That's being created right now. My friends at Holochain are literally building it. We just have moved out of alpha to beta. I have the first Holochain app actually on my computer, which is like a Kanban to-do board that doesn't go through any server, and yet you and I could collaborate through a Holochain application, which is really exciting to me. We keep assuming that these breakthroughs in technologies are not going to also create giant breakthroughs in our ability to coordinate with one another and create value for one another and find whole new ways of being able to do things that go around the systems that are corroded and don't work anymore. And I think the reason you see politicians become so polarized and the reason you see business leaders and unions become so I don't know, organized, I guess, if you will, or agitated, is because they fear their power going away. Right? I don't get so scared. If you look at, across time and the dance between light and dark and yin and yang, like this is how it goes, right? This happens here and then there's a counter reaction there. This is getting brighter. It's causing these people to get more scared. It doesn't mean it's going to last forever. We should actually be more prepared for this, right? This violent need to hold on to something. And I do believe in the power of the light.
What about the idea of like, I'm going to go make you laugh for a second. Gru and his little minions, right? So Gru gets the best AI out there in theory and has all his minions that have this desire for this power for whatever trauma or whatever happened in earlier in their life, which we don't need to go into all of those of us with trauma, but
which is, by the way, almost everybody, right? So it's got some version of that, different ranges of it. So yeah, we got to figure out how to navigate that. Yes.
And so what do you say to those people that you're looking at in a room and you're talking about the future and what's happening and they're worried about Gru taking over and everybody being gone because that one person wanted power?
Well, I can't say that it's not possible, right? But I do think that there are other constructs in place that make it so that person can't have all the power, right? What gives that person all the power right now is, again, because you've got computer systems and ways in which we give up our data and we make it so that person, that what that person feeds on is data. Mm-hmm. Right? If that data is something I actually hold more sovereignly and I give away more thoughtfully, that power goes away. Right? So I do think that we will have counterbalances that will make that possible. But the whole point when you talk about trauma and you started to like push it down, I actually think that this whole, you see inside organizations, this conversation around shadow work and getting people to be more comfortable with understanding their shadow selves and understanding what those triggers are, whether it's fully a trauma or just a trigger, so that they can navigate unknown and ambiguity and challenge much more graciously and with less fear or less resistance, right? And I think that overall as a society, if we can get there, right, we are meditating more, we're talking more about our own mental and emotional well-being. I think that's opening up a tremendous capacity to start to heal so that we aren't always in that kind of trauma reaction response. There's a big question right now of, Africa will have tremendous resources in the next few decades. It will become an incredibly important power around the world. But that is a country that has tremendous amount of intergenerational violence that has been built into the society. And so all of a sudden you're going to give really exponential tools to people who've grown up, with a tremendous amount of fear and violence. Not a great combo.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why then I get excited also about the psychedelic revolution and say, wow, there's this really interesting thing that's also happening, which is now we're looking at, other ways in which we can heal long-standing emotional trauma for people, or potentially just open up more cognitive capacity for people by maybe making it possible to decriminalize medicines that for longest time in indigenous cultures have been huge paths to wisdom, right, and collaborative systems.
I want to take you back to the shadow work, because if everybody that listens to this podcast is thinking, generally speaking, how can I get better, right? And so if you were to say the idea of shadow work, whether it's my 50 employees out there or myself, you're like 2 to 3 thoughts in terms of how you can be better.
When you say better, meaning like healed or feeling like more able to coordinate with other people? Like, how would you define?
We all have trauma. We have this shadow and those, as you said, triggers or traumas or whatever it is. How have you seen or heard the most effective ways of dealing with that and saying, I'm going to get the best out of myself? I see it all the time. I wake up stoked on life. You can probably tell I'm running at 5:30, and I have trauma. I know that my trauma comes from my parents' divorce and all that stuff, or being the smallest kid when I was a little kid. But those are like motivators, and then I see trauma affect friends, family, and that sort of thing that are complete demotivators or cancerous to them. Just curious on, like, you've talked to so many intelligent, smart people that put thought around this. Like, what would that person go, here's some things that I could do?
Well, first of all, I think it's not shaming it, right? I think that so much of when we were growing up, like, those things were things that you just like didn't talk to anybody about, or that you felt like you were on your own to try and sort out. So I think one of the big gifts of the pandemic is that we've made that stuff much more visible. People are able to talk about it more, and we recognize it. We also know that loneliness is a huge portion of what's happening right now. The Surgeon General is a big champion, if you can say such a thing, for ensuring that that becomes something that we pay more attention to. We think about in our social structures more, and we solve for that. We think about communities that people are building around housing that are trying to solve for loneliness. Like, these are big things that we used to think were only ours, and that we had to somehow solve for them all by ourselves. And now we're realizing that's actually partly systemic, and we need to think about this more collaboratively and more collectively. I'm very, very worried when I put on my, my riff map, the things that I'm most frightened about. It is the deteriorating mental health of our kids, right? We see that around the world, that depression, anxiety, loneliness, and suicidal ideation are all up, hugely up for teenage girls. And no wonder, like, the whole world is sort of stacked against them right now if you look at all the factors that are happening around that. So first of all, again, awareness, empathy, compassion. They're building social and emotional learning into schools now to try and help kids better identify their emotions and work through that and build a lifelong pattern for not repressing things. I think that's hugely healthy and really great. Again, are all school systems funded for that? Probably not. Is there enough teachers to go around and counselors? Probably not. But at least it's a start in that direction. I think inside our offices, to whatever extent you make mental health services and emotional health services free and available to people, right? That's a big part of it. Letting people know your own story, because I think that what they show, again, or what creates psychological safety inside organizations is when leaders are willing to tell their own stories and be more vulnerable around it and make it more visible, to show it's okay to feel these sorts of things. What you also see is, the sense of belonging at work. When people are able to tell not just their trauma story, but just stories of who they are. Vivek Murthy, again, the Surgeon General, one of my favorite stories, right? He started his office the first time he was Surgeon General in DC. They would have their weekly meetings as a team to coordinate, and they assigned a certain amount of time to those meetings for one person each week to, I think it has 10 slides and 10 minutes to tell their coworkers about their life or who they were. People loved that portion of the week. It became their favorite. I think it was only 5 minutes, actually. 5 minutes of the week, because they got to know Trent, right? They got to know Nancy. They got to know who this person was. And then it also created all kinds of other ancillary benefits and productivity lifts, because people then were willing to, engage more with them. They were willing to partner with them more. They worked longer hours. They threw out crazier ideas, like all that stuff just makes it feel safer to be you inside the organization. So I'm going off on like all kinds of tangents around it, but I think it's a bigger constellation of conversations than just how do I solve for a person's particular mental health trauma.
Yeah, I'm going to pick something out of what you said. You said a lot.
I know, sorry. My brain goes into all those places at the same time.
We both have kids that are about the same ages, and I don't think there's probably anything scarier in a world than listening to a daughter or son talk about like this suicide and the suicidal idolization, and it's proven that when it happens at one school, there's probably going to be more at that one school. It's a real thing, and it's so scary in terms of what we're doing. And on one hand, we want to give our kids this. We went from kind of us and having to do what we had to do to the next generation of kind of helicopter parenting, and did that really give them confidence and ego, the right healthy amount of ego and that sort of thing, to this crazy thing that's happened with this idea of I don't want to be here anymore.
Right.
That's a pretty scary place. And so again, best ideas you have in terms of like a parent that's listening that goes, I want to either get ahead of this or this just happened to me, and I want to make sure I can.
Well, first of all, I have tremendous empathy for parents who are going through this. And I used to throw out these statistics in my talks pretty clinically. Like I would write, like say them, and then people would come up to me afterwards and tell me personal stories that were happening for them. And I realized in every audience in which I ever get to speak, probably even tonight when I get to join, the group that you're a part of, there'll be somebody who's touched by this. And so I think having a lot more empathy for that and recognizing these are not stats, these are real stories that are happening in people's lives. There's a lot of things that collaborate or that are coming together. I've thought a lot about what all those different things are: sense of futility around the future, eco-anxiety, being really worried about the planet and feeling like it's not going to, like no one's paying attention to it, that no one is really trying to solve for it in a way that is taking into consideration that youth are going to inherit this at some point, worrying about machines that are going to take their jobs, like all that kind of stuff I think is real. For me, the place of intervention is a positive narrative of the future. Right? We talked about science fiction and how it impacts our beliefs of what's possible or what's not. If these kids are surrounded by stories that are scary, whether they're movies or whether they're news or whether they're parents. So my biggest advice to parents would be like, take a deep breath, balance out the news and give your kids a balanced perspective on things. I have spoken to some of the most, accomplished executives and amazing people, and they will tell me how scared they are for their kids. I'm like, your kids are hearing you say that. If you don't feel confident, like imagine how they feel. You're the one who's like building the world. You have a lot more agency, a lot more resource than they do. So they need to believe that the future has a tremendous amount of possibility and that they have an important place in it. It's not all being designed. It's not already done. It's not going to be done by machines. Like they get to design it. They get to create it. I just literally created Careers for the Future, which is an event that we do during South by Southwest. That's kind of not sanctioned by South by, but it happens simultaneously because what we do is pull some of the smartest people that are in town for South by that are whipping up the adults about all the cool things that are going to happen in the future. And we make that accessible to students because students have no access to that. Right? They don't get to go to South by because it's too expensive, or many of the free installations have alcohol in them, so kids can't get into them, which drives me insane. Right? The people who really need to hear it are the 14 to 21-year-olds or 21-year-olds, right? Who are really curious about what's going on and want to know that somebody's got their back. So I think if we could start there, that would go a long way to show them the breakthroughs that are happening every single day that are good, not just the news that's bad. I think would help them a lot. And then we're trying to help them build bridges to the future of work. They don't feel prepared right now for the future. Again, I go back to a curriculum is not preparing them well enough. So giving them a sense of agency and a sense of possibility to be able to create better bridges.
Yeah, that concept of being lonely and specifically around remote work. I mean, almost everybody I interview right now, we've been growing fast, wants at least one remote day, some totally remote. And so you have employees that are saying, trust me, I'm going to work hard and I'm going to work harder from home than I would here. And then you have the statistics showing that being at home all the time is not the best thing. And then you have companies like Google and that sort of thing that are saying, how do we get people here more? And how do we do these types of things? I'm curious how long this experiment plays out, and then where the happy medium is.
I think it's just part of a continuing conversation that we're going to continue to have around what, I make the distinction between the future of work and the future of working. What we're really talking about is right now the future of working, which is how do we get done the stuff that we currently can see that we can get done and pay people the same way that we normally pay people and whatever. And so part of it's a technology conversation. Part of it is it a remote or not remote situation. Part of it is what are is it a 4-day week or is it a 3-day week? Is it a 5-day week? Right? Like I think that's a whole nother level of conversation because it's moving in the direction of we're heading into a 4-day week for lots and lots of reasons that it's improving. What they found, I'm going to do a cheer for that because I'm a big proponent of 4-day work week, is if you have children, it helps you balance out your life more. I've been a 4-day work week person since the minute I had my first child. And this was even at really demanding ad agencies and really demanding companies. So I'm a big proponent of that. But we're also seeing all the productivity measures either be tested the same, and I need the tests that have been done, or they go up. So even if you're an organization where productivity is even at 4 days a week, you still win because retention goes up, well-being goes up, right? The desire, again, for people to feel a sense of belonging to the organization and loyalty to that goes up. Like there's a lot of things that go up, but it's an experiment that seems really scary for people to try, to imagine at some point, like how are we going to possibly deliver the same way we do if we do it at 4 days instead of 5? So these are the kinds of things I think we need to learn to get ahead of and experiment more. I think on the remote versus remote, I have an opinion on that too. But
yeah, as a CEO, the craziest conversations I have are I'm so overwhelmed. I have so much work to do, and then they don't work all day Friday. They hardly work at all on Friday. And you're like, well, wouldn't that I would say I'm overwhelmed. I'm going to finish all my work on Friday. And the employee goes, I'm so overwhelmed. I need an extra day off because I'm overwhelmed, which means I'm going to be further behind on my work. It's hard to navigate
but you
as
also
a
just
leader.
talked about ChatGPT and how that's going to come in and be able to be a huge productivity tool. So I think what we're going to do is get better with the tools that help us reduce the more rote tasks or the ones that require whatever amount of time, and we get to concentrate on the stuff that's really the hard part, which is the creativity part, the relationship building part, right? The innovation part. That's the part that actually is really tiring, and maybe we don't have to do that at 40 hours a week. If you looked at was it Charles Darwin and many of the people in his era, they didn't work 60 hours a week or 40 hours a week, constantly trying to like crank out big thinking and big ideas, right? They wrote for a few hours, then they would take a walk, then they would take a nap, then we'd have a long lunch, then they would sit down and do some correspondence, which is kind of like, social media these days, and then they would go back and do some more thinking. But it was a much more layered kind of a thing. It was a variability to their day versus we are on an industrial clock thinking that we need to crank out big ideas the same way that we cranked out widgets on an assembly line, and it's not working, right?
But for some, like an Elon Musk, right, who's known for his work ethic, and I don't know, depending on what day of the week, he's the wealthiest man in the world. What's kind of your take on that?
Is that the only measure we want to measure?
No,
Elon
I'm
Musk?
just. I'm
he also
saying,
has like 9 children. I don't know if he knows the names of all of them.
Well, he believes he should keep having them. I mean, it's a whole different thing we could get into. I'm just saying, like, when you look at those people that are achieving, and he's probably there's something there that's
yeah, but you also look at Satya Nadella, who I think is an amazing CEO, right? Mm-hmm. The CEO of Microsoft has a much more balanced perspective on us. I don't know how many hours he works or doesn't work, but I know that he actually values balance for people, and thinks about things like also that contract workers should be able to have access to health insurance and sick leave so that they aren't so stressed out and have to work so hard, be able to just like make it, rent for that month. So I do think you can pick, whichever CEO you want. I pattern more after Satya, who I think that is a compassionate, caring, thoughtful person who looks at these technologies, thinks about the power that's in them, but then builds things like mindfulness into teams so that people have a chance to be able to like take a deep breath in the middle of their work. Is anti-productivity software from the perspective or surveillance software that is of the punitive nature. Like, I don't think, again, it's about the software. I think it's about the intention. But he's, doesn't think that we should be putting software on everyone's computers that measure their, eyes, how open they are, or their keystrokes and how much they're doing, or how much time their butt's in a seat. So I think that there's lots of different ways you can pattern yourself as a leader. I choose, to fill a book full of examples of people who are doing it, I think, more compassionately, more thoughtfully.
Yeah, I think one of the most unique things on that as a growing organization is leadering in this way that you talk about it even in your book of being able to dynamically change. You have to be more dynamic and evolve. And at the same time, growing organizations need processes and systems. And you look at the most successful, it's process and people, right? And so you're like, how do we get the right processes and procedures in place? And at the same time, be so dynamic that you can shift off that.
Because can I suggest that we don't have processes, we have practices, right? That's where I think the big shift needs to happen, because I think processes don't work anymore, and something that's somewhat dynamic and so adaptive. And what you see when you talk to people who are thinking about the work of the future, that it will actually, instead of becoming more complex hierarchies that have more and more process, it'll look more like cell-like things where there'll be independent units of 10 to 12 people who self-organize their work. And decide at any given moment, again, we pay more attention here and less attention there, and that it is able to grow a big organization of whatever, I don't know if it's a corporation as much as it is, might be some sort of enterprise or some sort of collaborative collective, but it actually breaks the work down into smaller units instead of bigger units. So we will actually have better practices and less processes is the way I think you get there.
I like it. For however, 2,000 years, religion's had such a impact in terms of kind of our guiding light, morals, values, that sort of thing. And as you
if you were on the right side of it, not everybody thrived.
True. Again, we could do all that that time.
Yeah.
But as religion continues to become less, I'd say, of now you have just kind of like the full blown, or not just the full blown, but it seems like you have the extremes, and then you have less religion in the common family. Mm-hmm. How does a parent, or how do we as leaders navigate this new norm of things are happening fast, we have to do them in a socially conscious way, and we don't have this, you and I probably look at the golden rule and go, yeah, that's the way we would do it, but we also grew up, whether we were or not, with a larger religious undertone to how we live.
I guess my perspective on that is certainly organized religion is going down, and people's affiliation with it is going down. Partly, I think, again, because they felt like it's not holding them well, right? Mm-hmm. It was very I don't know, biased is the right word or punitive is the right word, but people just felt like it would, certain people were included and some people weren't included, and they didn't feel like that was really made sense to them. The big benefit for me around organized religion is that it offers community. So how do we replace community? Because right now, the rise of spirituality continues to go up, particularly for women. What's really scary right now is men. Men are, we see suicide rates for men at an all-time high. We see them not have enough friendships in order to feel that sense of connectivity to them. And church may have been the place where they had that before, or a bowling league is where they had that before. They don't have those constructs anymore. So I don't know how we solve for that one. I do think that on an individual level, you'll see spirituality go up. What that doesn't solve for is connectivity. Right? I might be connected to myself, I might be connected to a higher power, but I'm still not connected to you. And we need to find ways for people to feel more connected to one another, which is why we're seeing experiments in housing, again, where people can live differently. The whole uproar over Charles Munger's dorm over UCSB, I was actually it's sort of very much on the counter side of it, like where everyone else is flipped out about the fact that the rooms are going to be smaller and not have windows because they're really building for more collaborative space, more social space to try and pull students out of their rooms and into connective space with one another. I'm all for. I think that's actually a great idea. Right, to try and reduce the cost so the stress goes down, increase the social access to one another so that goes up. Like those are the problems we need to be solving for. So I think about them in a more, again, systemic way than maybe on an individual level. When my children want to join things, I'm all for balancing that out.
Just scared me. I think my kids' rooms are too nice.
I mean, that's part
I need
of it.
to turn their rooms
right?
into like dungeons.
I mean, that's basically what he was trying to do with those dorms, right?
Yeah.
The rooms are going to be really small. They were going to have like light, but they were going to have outside windows. And the idea is you sleep in there, but you don't do everything in there. You really you get pulled out so that you actually are connected to people. And I think we need to find more and more ways to connect to people. I think that we're going to be able to build more and more communal housing across all age groups at some point where the living space is small, but the social space is large, and find more and more ways to connect with one another. So it doesn't have to all be through work. So I think that's part of it is people are concerned about remote work because they think that means it's isolating. It doesn't have to be isolating if you're in communities of space. As we have 10-minute cities or 15-minute cities or 20-minute cities in which we're able to be more social in our space and not in our car the whole time. There's ways we can get out and connect to one another. That'll make a big difference.
Yeah, I think so much of what you talk about is so exciting. It's
so possible, by the way. It's not science fiction. It is really possible.
I know. It's how do we do it in a socially conscious way that eliminates or reduces fear. Fear of, we know there's good fear and there's bad fear. Right? The bad fear is I'm going to make less profits because I've been making the same drug forever, and now somebody can do mushrooms and they don't need Adderall anymore.
Right.
Something like that. And so that's now sudden drug companies going, oh great, somebody's gonna go get something natural. And I think that fear is good. I hope that happens, especially around psychedelics and that sort of thing.
The scary thing about psychedelics is that if we go to legalize them, though, and we pull them out of the indigenous cultures of which they are part, that actually that immediately then cuts it off again. So there's a difference between legalizing something and decriminalizing something and making it so everyone has a place in that ecosystem. So it'll be interesting to see how that whole thing moves.
Yeah, I mean, the hardest thing on that is the United States has this awful crisis with fentanyl right now. Yeah. And so on one hand, the one thing to do is, okay, we need to eliminate the black market. We need to, decriminalize, but also make everything regulated. And then what happens when it's regulated? You get right back into that world. So it's this. And, I talked to my buddy who, is in the CBD and marijuana dispensary and cultivation business. And there's so many great effects of CBD and cannabis. And at the same time, we're fighting this crisis in America that says people are literally losing their kids. And it's not just because they thought it was cocaine anymore. They used to think it was cocaine. Now it's a kid that says, oh, there's an Adderall shortage. I'm going to get Adderall on Snapchat. And the next thing you know, they die of fentanyl. So that fear, and there's no greater fear than losing your child.
That way. I mean, just be so, I can't even imagine.
I mean, at least it used to be when when people died of drug overdose, they were literally punishing themselves.
Well, and or they'd had a pattern that we could have intercepted.
Yes.
Right.
And that's not,
Yeah, no.
they had some sort of trauma and hurt and that sort of thing. So I'm not saying that's okay.
Yeah,
but now it could be somebody handing something to my kid and say, you're stressed about finals, try this. And I remember when I was in college reading an article in Runner's World about how Adderall was helping people run faster, right? And I was like, oh, that's pretty good to keep focus. I have like a mind that goes, maybe I should do that to run faster. And it was only like by the grace of God that my mom was like, no, you're not. You're not taking that prescription. You're either going to run faster or not. And I had that mom, and then I respected my mom enough to know that like, okay, I'm going to listen to her. That doesn't exist out there all the time.
No.
It's pretty scary.
It is scary. So I think, again, but all of these conversations, Trent, are going to be complex, right? Where do we put the lever here versus there? You think about AI ethics as a part of that. You think about environmental stability versus economic vitality. Like these are complex things. And I think where we get in trouble is we keep trying to figure out it should be only this way or only that way. And we don't have a rational conversation anywhere in the middle around any of that stuff. Right? I could say abortion rights would go in there as well, or feminine justice. I mean, I think that everything has become so on the extreme that we don't get to have the conversation about what makes sense. Like, where does it make sense to regulate something? Where does it maybe not make sense to regulate something? And again, to your point, there will be a lot of protected interests that want to have it a certain way because it works really well from them from a financial standpoint. And the question will be, what are the forces that either push that out or work around it in some way and make it not so possible? So.
I have a unique question, and I'm going to pose that to you. France today is protesting in the streets because they're trying to raise the retirement age. Those that are obviously going to be most affected are those around retirement age. You can't vote in this country unless you're 18. You could make the same argument that somebody that's 98 years old doesn't understand, and you and I talked a little bit about this, doesn't understand everything that's happening today with AI. Everything that's going, the world is so different than the world they grew up in. It would never happen, but does it make sense for there to be a maximum age similar to there as a minimum age?
Can we start with driving? Can we just go there first? Can we do a maximum driving age? Because I also don't think everybody should be on the road.
100%.
Right? And I've had both those conversations with my dad. He finally gave up his car, and I told you last round, he chose not to vote for the main party candidates because he and I were in such different places around that, and felt like he needed to think about respect his grandchildren and what was going to be meaningful to them as they started to become voters for the first time. I think that, what's interesting, again, if you look at, they did go through a lot when they were older, right? There was a lot of change when you think about where we were at the beginning of the century to where we were at the end of the century, and they got to see a lot of change happen. So I'd like to think that they apply that wisdom in a really a thoughtful way. So I don't know, does there need to be a cognitive test for voting? I don't know.
Yeah. Seems natural.
It does. I think that I would go the opposite. Can we just get young people to turn out to vote? Right? Because I don't want to deny anybody the chance to vote, but I really, really want to encourage. We have a much younger population. I mean, there are more people on the planet, as you saw, that thing I wrote recently. 50% of the population of the world is under 30. 42% of the world is under 25. In the United States, it's less so. I think maybe 27%, I think, are under 25. But they've just got out and voted. Like, that would be great. They have big numbers.
Yeah.
Right? They could vote for the thing that they want to see.
It's so unique, though, because I can see both sides of this. I see, okay, how do we get them to vote? Well, let's make it easier. Let's send a ballot to their house. And then you go ballot harvesting. Somebody goes to the dorms and gets $10 for every blank ballot they do, and they fill it out themselves, and it's not the true vote. Right. And then you have AI that somebody goes, all right, so what's the next system? Well, let's just have everybody, let's manipulate it or whatever it is.
Yeah, but I don't even think you manipulate it. Estonia, they've got everything digitized, right?
Yeah.
Everything is automated at this point. Why are we still doing it in the most antiquated way possible? Right?
Fear.
Because, partly fear, because people want to control who gets access and who doesn't have access to the vote. I'm from Atlanta. The fact that, you can't give out water to someone who's standing in line on a hot day in Atlanta when they vote, because somehow that would be seen as favoritism. Just things like that are insane right now. So I think there's a lot of gerrymandering. There's actually a study I saw, and I wish I could go back to it because I can't find it. So if somebody can find it on your podcast, that'd be awesome. But that showed that now, because of the way the electoral maps are drawn, the likelihood that the candidate from that jurisdiction will always be Republican or will always be Democrat is higher than it's ever been before, which means a very, very small percent of elections are actually for swing voters. Right? That's actually a really scary thing when you think about it. Because then it's like, does my vote doesn't even count or does it even matter? And then there's no incentive for that candidate to appeal to the center. The candidate always has to appeal to the most extreme in that candidate in that party because that's who controls that particular jurisdiction. Like those are the scary things around it. But I think if we can fix that kind of stuff, students would stand in line for as long as we want them to stand in line. They just don't think it matters right now.
Or think if they took the amount of money that was spent on that Georgia runoff and they said, so getting back to the very point earlier, if we gave every single person in Georgia access to the internet and to a device they could get on, no matter where they live for free, that would, no matter what candidate they did, they could have put, not to say tongue-in-cheek, but Fetterman, who should not be whether you're Republican or Democrat, he should not be making those decisions today. And they spent so much money on choosing who's going to vote instead of getting that basic equality and opportunity that's there. And that's crazy to me. That two-party system, as you know, I think I told you I'm a libertarian. I have hope for that third party one day is they just pander to the far right, to the far left. If you're a centrist, you're going to get beat up. You're going to get beat up to the point by all that right that you're not Republican enough, you're not Democrat enough. And
again, because we're in these gerrymandered jurisdictions, that works. Historically, when you had to appeal to the swing voter, that didn't work. But the system is all kind of corroded. I think if I had the biggest magic wand, it would be campaign finance reform. Oh. That would solve a whole lot of problems because then the interests that you feel for the legislator, the person who's running for office has to have so much money to be able to run for that office, regardless of where they are in the stack, that it ends up corroding a whole bunch of other stuff. And if we didn't have that, wouldn't that be better?
It's crazy. We started this accountability pack just to create basic facts in Long Beach local elections. The amount of you put yourself out there as a person that wants to support your community, how the unions came after me and my friend that started it was insane.
Yeah.
Trying to come after us with personal things that are, so we're step out. We're going to help the community. We just want the facts out there. And then you have unions just trying to destroy our reputations, our lives. It's so crazy.
And we're going to see that more, right? Because and the interesting thing now is Gen Z is organizing more, right? We see the growth in union as opposed to the diminishing of unions as they get older. Why? Because they think that there's some safety in there. People are looking for an affiliation that gives them some sense of safety. So whether you're a teacher who doesn't want to be replaced by robots or have there's a whole conversation right now about many schools are going to need to be closed because the demographics are getting smaller, and yet no one's going to want to close those schools in the U.S., right? Because teachers are wedded to those buildings. God forbid we move people around or shift resources in some more adaptive way, right? We're going to be stuck with people in that building have to work even if there's not enough students to be in that building. That's the kind of crazy. But again, that kind of stuff has been around forever. As a country, some figured out our way through some of these things. Hotel workers, are striking because of robots are going to again clean rooms in hotels. Assembly car assembly people, auto workers, continue to try and strike these deals that ensure that X amount of people have to be working on an assembly line when we're not going to have those kinds of assembly lines. They're going to be some more and more automated. This is the kind of stuff. But again, people don't feel safe. They don't feel well held. They don't think that there's a policy that's going to actually give them some of the resources and a quality of life without that thing. And so I think it's a big, big question about how do we solve for all of this moving forward. And so maybe giving you a chance to monetize your data becomes a way in which I don't have to have the job, but I get credit for them contributing to this digital world that we're a part of, right? But it was Andrew Yang's big thing about how do we think about the digital dividend. Do we think again about some sort of universal, whatever it is, it's income or housing or transportation or childcare or food or education, whatever it is. There's a whole range of things that we might be able to offer much more effectively than in the future. I just think to me, the really big conversations are how do we scaffold for an exponential future?
I believe the next 18 to 36 months, you are going to see so many companies either hockey stick up or fail. on these very concepts of, I have a good friend that they have a warehouse that is gigantic, 1.5 million square feet. They got like 20 employees in there because it's all driven cars. Here's the unique thing. If that same company waits 5 years and says, oh, there's all this new technology, we're going to have, it's a water company, and we're going to have these trucks show up, and then these auto-driven, self-driving vehicles are going to pick up the pallet and move it over here, blah, blah. In 5 years, that technology may be there, but if there's 1,000 workers, they could unionize and block it. But by them getting ahead of it, there's only 40 employees to unionize. And they don't have relevance.
Right.
So by going down this technology, so many of the old guard aren't going to change. It's like the auto industry in 2001. Everybody freaked out about the defined benefit plans because there was all these losses in the defined benefit plans, and any old auto company, their structure was broken.
Right.
There's a certain magic to Tesla because of the non-union piece of it. They don't have that, that weight that's just dragging behind them as they're trying to run the race. And it's going to be a fascinating 18 to 36 months over
right. But the interesting thing for Tesla, as I understand it, right, one of my older son's good friends works for them, and you've seen other people work for them. They don't have some of the same structures, but that they were relying on the equity as being the missing piece, right? Mm-hmm. And then the equity suddenly plummets and isn't as valuable anymore. And all of a sudden, what happens to the people who were counting on that to be part of the constellation of things that kept them solvent?
Yeah.
And so I think those are the interesting things. Like, again, I'm not saying that everyone has to have this. The fact that health insurance is tied to employment is insane for me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how. I know how that happened, but it's crazy that happened. And I wish that it could get decoupled and we could think about these things differently. So I think that these are interesting conversations, again, about how we build the company of the future, how we would build the society that I think we deserve is really what I'm thinking about. How do we give for our kids the society that they deserve and the quality of life that we were blessed enough to be able to work our way toward, right? I didn't come from very much, and yet somehow had this opportunity to build a life that is really quite beautiful and quite extraordinary. I'm really grateful that I was given a college scholarship and then enough opportunity along the way to make it work. It's not that easy for students anymore. And so how do we make it so that it is again?
Yeah, just that piece on we had a chance to fix healthcare forever, and Obama was there and he had the right concept, but they jammed it through without it being vetted. And then when you rush anything, whether it's a car or it's a health insurance program or anything else, it got left open to be exposed, and it brought out the worst parts of that, the inherent conflicts of interest and all those things instead of being fully vetted. So I to this day, I'm disappointed in that. As we get to the end of this interview, I always say you get a question for me. So any question you have that you've kind of known or don't know, do you have anything that you want to ask me?
What inspires you when you look ahead?
Opportunity. I think that this idea of a new world creates a new base for us. I have a hard time accepting reparations are going to change things. I have a hard time believing that some of these social programs are going to change things. I believe creating an opportunity at the very base level can change our world the most, because we know that those that are the most successful, there are those outliers, right? Have something in them that makes them different, that makes them creative, that makes them want to be something. So without giving away and creating an entitlement, I think there's this is this new start that allows us to do. I've been working with the Boys and Girls Club forever, and the reason me and my kids are always doing everything is they go through and they realize, hey, that guy doesn't have the same opportunity as us. I can either A, just keep going, or B, I can have the success I'm going to have without feeling guilty because I know I'm lifting somebody else up. So many people in America want to say, if you're successful, you should feel guilt, or you don't deserve it, or you have a leg up. And I'm a white male. I can't change that. My dad was a successful life insurance. I can't change that. What I can do, and what I believe is fundamental, is I can change it myself in a more effective and efficient way than the government can. Mm-hmm. And so I despise the government telling me that they're going to do it better because they don't. They fail. They fail on everything. Medicare is like our most inefficient, most overpriced thing out there. And Social Security, same thing. This is a good reset for us. I think this is an opportunity with AI and technology and all that to say, let's recreate the base. But my fear is that it creates a separation, right? Because those with access and those with knowledge can take advantage of it and leave everybody else behind. And so our job is to make sure that we're bringing not just one, but 10, 20, 30, 200 people up with us. And so that would be...
I love all that. And I would expand it to say that it's not only for people who are really good at business, right? It's also for people who have other contributions that they want to be able to make. So there was, I think it was John Adams, I'm trying to remember which of the founding father presidents, who said, we will be soldiers so that our sons can be farmers, so their sons could be artists. Mm-hmm. So imagine that we said people instead of just sons. But the idea is that maybe that people who have a lot to contribute to society that don't normally get compensated for it right now because they are creators in some way, or they are caregivers in some way, or they're teachers in some way, right? That's the part where the equation hasn't quite worked itself out yet. Because right now people who are really, really good at business and are good at making money are disproportionately compensated in that system. And so the question will be, is there a way to be able to, everyone has work inside them. Everything is something they're passionate to do and some way in which they want to express their unique gifts and point of view. And so is there a way for that to feel more distributed?
We see it on some, right? The extremes, the musicians.
Yeah, but even then they're struggling. There's like this percentage, right?
It's how do you balance that across?
Yeah, and that's why you have this creator economy now. You've got these other interesting things that are happening that are trying to, put some of the weight, to shift some of the resources or some of the attention there. But it'll be interesting to see. All I'm saying is I love the vision. I would just expand it to say, regardless of where your passion comes from and where your value that you want to create is how it's expressed, that you have a place in this economy and you've got a place in a society that feels safe. Yeah.
I think that with everything you talk about and we've just explored today, that divide, somebody's going to listen and they're going to say, that scares me. I don't want to learn about it.
Right.
And they're going to be left behind. And others are going to say,
I know.
Holy shit, that's a great opportunity. I'm going to dig in and I'm going to go. And, somebody told me to take a coding class my freshman year at Santa Barbara. Mm-hmm. They had Fortran available and I went into that class and I dropped it midway through because it was miserable.
Right.
God, I wish I knew I had to code today, right?
The good news is low code, no code is happening now, so you don't need to worry about it so much. And with ChatGPT Copilot, you can code anything you want, but you understand how computers work. That's what I'm saying. Conceptually, once you understand how computers work, how algorithms work, how we build these kinds of solutions, that's the kind of teaching that we definitely want to make available. And again, just trying to make it as distributed as possible, so that if anybody with a device has access to this and can go figure this thing out and feel part of it. And one of the things that inspires me is that, the technologists will reach more and more now to the humanists, and the humanists are going to reach more and more to the technologists. And I think there's going to be more of a weave. So it doesn't have to be only these people get it and figure it out and are building it without any understanding of ethics or human behavior. And these folks can be part of building and designing the stuff that's going to be, basically framing our entire existence moving forward. So
that's awesome.
That to me is, I think it's just full of humongous opportunity. And to your point, making it available to as many people so they can participate as possible.
I could do this for 5 hours.
We could solve the whole world.
Yeah, we
I
could.
know, what are we going to, I know we should run our own, thing. We have to figure out, who knows what Nancy and Trent will start as a result of this. But thank you for the conversation. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on, and I hope it's not our last.
Good. Me either. Thanks.